A young black man in a perfectly tailored suit approaches the marble steps of the federal courthouse on what should be the most important day of his career. The morning sun gleams off the imposing columns as he clutches his briefcase, taking a deep breath before entering the building that represents everything he's worked for his entire life. But as he reaches the security checkpoint, two guards step forward, their hands moving instinctively to their belts. "Hold up there," one of them says, his voice carrying an edge that makes nearby lawyers turn their heads. "Where do you think you're going?" The young man's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. He's been here before, not in this courthouse, but in this moment. The moment when assumptions are made, when character is judged by appearance, when years of achievement are dismissed with a single glance. What happens next will shock everyone in that courthouse corridor, because sometimes the person you least expect to hold power is exactly the one who does. Sometimes the individual you judge by their age, their race, or their appearance is the very person who will determine your fate. This is the story of Zephyr Washington and the day he reminded an entire courthouse that justice truly is blind, even when those who serve it are not. It's a story about dignity, perseverance, and the moment when prejudice met its match in the most unexpected way possible. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change how you think about assumptions, authority, and the true meaning of justice in America. Zephyr Washington never thought he'd see the inside of a courthouse as anything other than a defendant. Growing up in the Riverside projects of Detroit, he watched his older brother Marcus get arrested 3 times before his 18th birthday. He saw his neighbor's sons disappear into the criminal justice system, like water down a drain, there one day, gone the next, leaving behind only mothers who aged 10 years in 10 months. But Zephyr's grandmother, Celestine Washington, had different plans. Every morning before school, she would sit him down at their small kitchen table, point to the framed photo of Thurgood Marshall on the wall and say, "Baby, that man didn't break down doors so you could walk through them backward. You're going to be somebody who changes things, not somebody who gets changed by them." She was right, though she didn't live to see just how right. Zephyr graduated valedictorian from Cass Technical High School, earned a full scholarship to Howard University, and then accomplished what everyone in his neighborhood thought was impossible. He got into Harvard Law School. Not just got in, but thrived. He was editor of the Harvard Law Review, graduated magna cum laude, and clerked for Justice Elena Kagan before joining the Department of Justice. At 28, he became the youngest federal judge ever appointed to the Eastern District of Michigan. The confirmation hearing had been brutal, senators questioning his experience, his temperament, his ability to be impartial given his background. But Zephyr had answered every question with the same steady dignity his grandmother had taught him, and eventually, even his harshest critics had to admit he was qualified. Today marked his first major case, a civil rights lawsuit that had captured national attention. The plaintiff, a young black student named Caleb Rivers, claimed he'd been denied entry to the University of Michigan Law School despite having higher test scores and grades than several admitted white students. The university argued their holistic admissions process considered many factors beyond test scores. Zephyr had spent weeks preparing, knowing that every eye in the legal community would be watching. This case would set precedent, and more importantly, it would establish his reputation as a jurist. He'd chosen his finest navy suit, the one his mentor, Judge Patricia Williams, had helped him pick out for his confirmation hearing. His tie was perfectly knotted, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his briefcase contained months of research and preparation. As he'd looked in the mirror that morning, he'd thought about all the people who'd told him he'd never make it. The high school counselor who'd suggested community college instead of Howard. The law school classmate who'd asked if he was there because of diversity quotas. The lawyer at his first job who'd mistaken him for a paralegal despite his Harvard degree. But he'd also thought about the people who'd believed in him. His grandmother, his mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep him in school, his law school professors who'd seen his potential, and Justice Kagan, who'd written him a recommendation letter that began, "In 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered a legal mind as sharp and compassionate as Zephyr Washington's. End of preface. This book is dedicated to Mary Jane Gilfridge and Bridget Wagner. Today, he would preside over a case that would determine whether a young black man would get the same opportunities Zephyr had fought so hard to achieve. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd gone from a kid who might have been profiled by security guards to a federal judge who would determine the fate of civil rights law. He'd arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, wanting to settle in before the media circus began. The case had attracted protesters on both sides, and the courthouse steps were already crowded with reporters and cameras. Zephyr had parked in the judge's underground garage but decided to enter through the main entrance. He wanted to see the courthouse the way litigants and citizens saw it, to remind himself that justice should be accessible to everyone. That decision would prove to be more significant than he could have imagined. The Theodore Levin United States Courthouse stood like a fortress of justice in downtown Detroit, its limestone facade gleaming in the morning sun. Built in 1934, the Art Deco building had witnessed decades of legal history, from the desegregation cases of the 1960s to the corporate fraud trials of the 2000. Today it buzzed with an energy that old-timers said reminded them of the civil rights era. Television news trucks lined Lafayette Boulevard, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. Reporters clutched coffee cups and checked their makeup in compact mirrors, preparing for live shots that would beam this story across the nation. The case of Rivers v. University of Michigan had captured the country's attention because it struck at the heart of America's ongoing struggle with race and opportunity. Inside the courthouse, the marble floors gleamed under the light of massive chandeliers. The walls displayed portraits of judges who'd served with distinction, their stern faces watching over the proceedings below. Court officers moved with practiced efficiency, checking security passes and directing lawyers to their proper courtrooms. Courtroom 6A, where today's hearing would take place, was already packed. The mahogany benches were filled with law students, civil rights activists, and curious citizens who'd managed to secure seats through the lottery system. The plaintiff's table held a stack of legal briefs and a water pitcher that no one had touched. Nerves, perhaps, or the weight of history. The defendant's table was similarly prepared, though the university's legal team carried themselves with the confidence of people who'd rarely lost a case. They whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing at the clock, knowing that federal judges were notorious for their punctuality. The press section overflowed with journalists from major newspapers and legal publications. This case would be analyzed in law schools for decades. The questions it raised about affirmative action, equal opportunity, and the true meaning of merit in American society were as relevant today as they'd been when the Civil Rights Act was passed. But perhaps the most telling detail was the security presence. Extra guards had been posted throughout the courthouse, not because anyone expected violence, but because emotions ran high when America confronted its complicated relationship with race and justice. The guards watched every face, every movement, every person who approached their checkpoints. They were trained to be suspicious, to look for threats, to make split-second judgments about who belonged and who didn't. Today that training would be put to the test in ways they never anticipated. Zephyr approached the main security checkpoint with the confidence of a man who belonged there. The metal detectors beeped steadily as lawyers and court staff passed through, their familiar faces earning nods from the guards. He reached into his briefcase for his identification, the same routine he'd performed dozens of times at federal buildings across the country. "Excuse me," Officer Dennis McKinley called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd worked courthouse security for 15 years. "You need to step aside." Zephyr looked up, confused. "I'm sorry? Step aside, please. Let the attorneys through first." The words hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the courthouse lobby continued its morning rhythm, lawyers chatting about cases, clerks rushing with armloads of files, the distant sound of elevators opening and closing. But in the space between Zephyr and the guards, time seemed to slow. "I am an attorney," Zephyr said quietly, his voice steady despite the familiar burn of humiliation rising in his chest. "I'm here for the Rivers case." McKinley's partner, Officer Janet Torres, stepped forward. She was newer to the job, only 3 years on courthouse security, but she'd seen enough to know trouble when she saw it. "What firm are you with?" "I'm not with a firm." Zephyr reached again for his briefcase. "Hold it right there." McKinley's hand moved to his radio. "Don't reach for anything. State your business." The checkpoint had gone quiet. Lawyers who'd been chatting about their weekend plans now watched with the uncomfortable fascination of people witnessing a car accident. A news reporter who'd been checking her phone looked up, her journalistic instincts sensing a story. "There's been a misunderstanding," Zephyr said, his voice carrying the measured tone he'd perfected during his confirmation hearings. "I'm here for official business. May I show you my identification?" "Slowly," Torres said, her hand resting on her belt. "And explain what you're doing here." Zephyr's mind raced. He could feel the weight of every stare, every assumption being made about him in that moment. The young black man in the expensive suit who clearly didn't belong. The potential troublemaker who needed to be handled carefully. The person who'd somehow slipped past whatever screening process should have kept him out. He thought about his grandmother, who'd told him stories about the indignities she'd faced as a young woman, being asked to use service entrances, being followed in stores, being treated as guilty until proven innocent. She'd survived the Jim Crow era with her dignity intact, and she'd raised him to do the same. "I'm here for the Rivers v. University of Michigan case," he said, slowly reaching into his briefcase. "I have proper identification." "What's your role in the case?" McKinley pressed. "Are you a witness, a family member?" The question hit Zephyr like a physical blow. In all his years of legal practice, through law school and clerkships and government service, he'd never been asked to justify his presence in a courthouse. He'd walked through these same metal detectors as a young DOJ attorney, as a clerk, as a legal observer. But now, in his most important role, he was being treated like an intruder. "I'm the judge," he said simply. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Torres looked at McKinley, who looked back at her with the expression of someone who'd just been told the sun was green. "The judge," McKinley's voice dripped with skepticism. "Listen, son, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but Judge Washington isn't scheduled to arrive until— I am Judge Washington." The lobby had gone completely quiet now. The morning rush of legal professionals had stopped to watch this confrontation unfold. A young law student held up her phone, unsure whether she should be recording. A veteran court reporter who'd seen 40 years of legal proceedings shook her head in disbelief. "You're going to need to prove that," Torres said, her voice softer now but still skeptical. "Because Judge Washington is, well, he's black," Zephyr finished. "Young? Not what you expected?" McKinley stepped closer, his 15 years of experience telling him this situation was spiraling out of control. "Look, we're just doing our jobs here. You can't blame us for being suspicious when—" "When what?" Zephyr interrupted, his composure finally cracking. "When a black man in a suit shows up at a courthouse? When someone who doesn't fit your image of what a judge should look like tries to enter his own courtroom?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Around them, the witnesses to this confrontation shifted uncomfortably. Some pulled out phones, sensing that whatever was happening would be news within the hour. Others simply stared, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't seen anything. "We're not racial profiling," Torres said defensively. "We're just what?" Zephyr's voice rose slightly, then immediately dropped back to its measured tone. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "Just doing your job of assuming that a young black man couldn't possibly be a federal judge? Just following protocol that says someone who looks like me needs extra scrutiny?" McKinley's face was reddening now, whether from embarrassment or anger it was hard to tell. "We have procedures here, and everyone has to follow them, even if you are who you say you are. You can't just walk in here and expect—" "I expect to be treated with the same respect as every other federal judge who walks through these doors," Zephyr said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect in the highest courts in the land. "I expect to enter my own courthouse without being treated like a criminal." The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. In the silence, the sound of the metal detectors seemed unnaturally loud. The morning sun streaming through the courthouse windows cast long shadows across the marble floor, and in those shadows, the weight of history seemed to press down on everyone present. This was more than a case of mistaken identity. This was a moment that would define not just Zephyr's day, but his entire tenure as a judge. How he handled this confrontation would be remembered, analyzed, and probably replayed on every news channel in the country. He reached slowly into his inside jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and careful. "I'm going to show you my identification now," he said. "And then I'm going to ask you to step aside so I can do my job." Zephyr's hand emerged from his jacket, holding a small leather case. He opened it slowly, deliberately, and held it up for both guards to see. The morning light streaming through the courthouse windows caught the gold emblem, making it gleam like a small sun. The United States Federal Judicial Badge was unmistakable. An eagle perched atop scales of justice, surrounded by stars, with United States inscribed in elegant script. Below it, in smaller letters, was his name. The Honorable Zephyr Washington. McKinley's face went through several shades of red before settling on ash gray. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Torres actually took a step backward, her hand coming up to cover her mouth in shock. "Sweet Jesus," whispered someone in the crowd that had gathered. The Federal Judicial Badge wasn't something you could fake or buy online. It was issued only to confirmed federal judges, and it carried the full weight of the United States government behind it. To doubt its authenticity was to doubt the system itself. I'm sorry, Your Honor," McKinley stammered, his 15 years of courthouse experience suddenly feeling inadequate. "We didn't... You don't look like..." "Like what?" Zephyr asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Like a judge? Like someone who belongs here? Like someone who could possibly have the authority to preside over federal cases?" The crowd had grown larger now. Word was spreading through the courthouse like wildfire. The young black man at security was actually the judge. Lawyers were whispering to their colleagues, court staff were rushing to get a glimpse, and someone had definitely started filming with their phone. Torres found her voice first. "Your Honor, we deeply apologize. We were following protocol." "Protocol?" Zephyr closed the badge holder with a sharp snap. "What protocol exactly? The one that says young black men can't be federal judges? The one that says you should assume someone is a threat based on their appearance? The one that says dignity and respect are conditional on meeting your expectations?" A court reporter who'd been watching from the elevator bank finally spoke up. "Your Honor, we've been expecting you in courtroom 6A. The Rivers case is scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. The mention of the case sent a ripple through the crowd. Everyone knew about Rivers v. University of Michigan. It was the most high-profile civil rights case of the year. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present that the judge who would decide a case about racial discrimination had just been racially profiled by courthouse security. "Thank you, Miss Patterson," Zephyr said, recognizing the court reporter from his briefing materials. "I'll be there shortly." McKinley was now visibly sweating. "Your Honor, please, we made a mistake. We didn't recognize you, and we just..." "You just what?" Zephyr interrupted. "You just assumed that because I'm young and black, I couldn't possibly be in a position of authority? You just decided that someone who looks like me needs to be questioned, searched, and treated with suspicion?" The security checkpoint had become a stage, and everyone knew they were witnessing something significant. A young lawyer who'd just passed the bar whispered to her colleague, "This is going to be on every legal blog in the country by noon." She was right. But more than that, it was going to be a defining moment for everyone present. The guards, who'd let their assumptions cloud their judgment. The lawyers, who'd watched in silence. The court staff, who'd known better, but hadn't intervened. "I want to be very clear about something," Zephyr continued, his voice carrying the authority that had earned him unanimous confirmation to the federal bench. I am Judge Zephyr Washington of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan. I was appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the United States Senate. I have the authority to preside over federal cases, to interpret the law, and to ensure that justice is served fairly and impartially. He paused, letting his words sink in. But before I was a judge, I was a young black man who had to prove himself every step of the way. I had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. I had to overcome assumptions and stereotypes, and people who thought someone who looked like me couldn't possibly belong in their world. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the usual sounds of the courthouse, the distant hum of elevators, the click of heels on marble, the rustle of legal papers, seemed muted. Today, I was reminded that no matter how high I climb, no matter what I achieve, there will always be people who see my skin color before they see my qualifications. There will always be those who assume I'm the problem rather than the solution. McKinley looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. Torres was blinking back tears. Whether from embarrassment or shame, it was hard to tell. But here's what I want you to understand, Zephyr continued. This badge doesn't make me worthy of respect. My character does. My education does. My commitment to justice does. And every person who walks through these doors, regardless of their age or race or appearance, deserves to be treated with the same dignity and respect that you would show to me. He straightened his tie and picked up his briefcase. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a case to preside over. A case about whether a young black man deserves the same opportunities as everyone else. I wonder if this morning's events will influence how I view the evidence. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Zephyr walked toward the elevators. Behind him, the security checkpoint buzzed with hushed conversations and the sound of phones being frantically tapped as people shared what they'd just witnessed. As the elevator doors closed, Zephyr caught a glimpse of McKinley and Torres standing frozen by their metal detectors, probably wondering if they still had jobs. The elevator ride to the 6th floor gave Zephyr 30 seconds to compose himself. 30 seconds to transform from the humiliated young man at security into the federal judge who would preside over one of the most important civil rights cases of the decade. As the doors opened, he straightened his shoulders and walked toward courtroom 6A with the dignity his grandmother had taught him. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls wherever the marshals would allow. The press section overflowed with journalists from major newspapers, legal magazines, and television networks. This case had captured the nation's attention, and now, after word of the security incident had spread, the stakes felt even higher. As Zephyr entered through the judge's chamber door, the bailiff called out, "All rise. The United States District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan is now in session, the Honorable Zephyr Washington presiding." The sound of 200 people rising to their feet filled the courtroom. Zephyr took his place behind the bench, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a physical force. He looked out at the sea of faces, lawyers, students, activists, reporters, and ordinary citizens who'd come to witness justice in action. "Please be seated," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "We are here today in the matter of Rivers v. University of Michigan, case number 224, CV 11075417. Before we begin, I want to address something that occurred this morning in the courthouse lobby." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several reporters leaned forward, their pens poised over notebooks. "This morning, I was stopped by security guards who questioned my right to enter this courthouse. They assumed, based on my appearance, that I could not possibly be the federal judge assigned to this case. They were wrong. But their assumption reveals something important about the very issues we're here to address today." The plaintiff's attorney, Maya Patel, glanced at her client, Caleb Rivers, who sat straight-backed in his chair. At 24, Caleb had graduated summa cum laude from Michigan State University with a degree in political science. His LSAT score placed him in the 95th percentile, and his personal statement about growing up in Detroit's inner city had moved admissions committees to tears. But the University of Michigan Law School had rejected him, citing their holistic admissions process that considered factors beyond test scores. This case, Zephyr continued, is about more than admissions policies or test scores. It's about the assumptions we make about people based on their appearance, their background, their race. It's about whether we truly believe in equal opportunity, or whether we simply pay lip service to it while maintaining systems that perpetuate inequality. The defense table, led by veteran attorney Robert Steinberg, shifted uncomfortably. They'd prepared to argue that the university's admissions process was fair and legal, that it considered many factors beyond race. But the morning's events had reframed the entire case. Mr. Rivers, Zephyr addressed the plaintiff directly. Please stand. Caleb rose, his hands clasped behind his back. He was tall and lean, with the same determined expression that had carried him through 4 years of undergraduate studies while working 2 jobs to pay for school. You applied to the University of Michigan Law School with a 3.9 GPA and an LSAT score of 172. You wrote a personal statement about your desire to return to Detroit as a public defender, to help people who couldn't afford quality legal representation. You were rejected. Do you believe that rejection was based on your qualifications, or on assumptions about your character, your potential, or your worth? Maya Patel started to object. Judges weren't supposed to question plaintiffs directly, but something in Zephyr's tone made her pause. Your Honor, Caleb said, his voice steady despite the pressure of the moment. I believe I was rejected because someone looked at my application and saw a young black man from Detroit, and they assumed I wouldn't fit in. They assumed I wasn't Michigan material. They assumed I was there to fill a quota rather than to earn my place. The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of pens and the subtle hum of recording equipment. And how did that make you feel? Zephyr asked. It made me feel the same way I've felt my entire life, Your Honor. Like I have to prove I belong everywhere I go. Like my achievements don't speak for themselves. Like no matter what I accomplish, someone will always question whether I deserve it. Zephyr nodded slowly. Mr. Steinberg, please address the court. The defense attorney rose, his 30 years of experience evident in his confident posture. Your Honor, the University of Michigan Law School has a long-standing commitment to diversity and inclusion. Our admissions process considers many factors, including race, Zephyr interrupted, including various demographic factors that contribute to a diverse learning environment. So you consider race when making admissions decisions. We consider the full spectrum of an applicant's background and experience. That's not what I asked. Zephyr's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years cutting through legal obfuscation. Do you consider race when making admissions decisions? Yes or no? Steinberg glanced at his clients, then back at the judge. Yes, Your Honor. Race is one factor among many that we consider. And in Mr. Rivers' case, how did his race factor into the decision? We, the admissions committee, felt that his background and experiences, while valuable, didn't align with the specific diversity goals for that year's class. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Zephyr leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Let me understand this correctly. You rejected a young black man with superior qualifications because his background didn't align with your diversity goals? Because he wasn't the right kind of black student? Because he came from Detroit instead of the suburbs? Because he wanted to be a public defender instead of a corporate lawyer? Your Honor, that's... Mr. Steinberg, I'm going to stop you right there. Zephyr's voice filled the courtroom. This morning I was stopped by security guards who made assumptions about me based on my appearance. They assumed I couldn't be a federal judge because I didn't fit their image of what a judge should look like. Sound familiar? The defense attorney's face went pale. Your Honor, I don't think... You don't think what? That there's a connection between assuming a young black man can't be a federal judge and assuming a young black man from Detroit can't be Michigan Law School material? That there's a pattern here of making judgments based on race rather than merit? Zephyr stood up, his black robes flowing around him like the wings of justice itself. I'm going to render my judgment now, and I want everyone in this courtroom to to understand why. The silence was absolute. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling, caught up in the moment. The University of Michigan Law School violated Mr. Rivers' civil rights by rejecting him based on racial assumptions and stereotypes. They looked at his application and saw not his qualifications, but their preconceptions about what kind of person he was and what kind of lawyer he would become. He looked directly at Caleb Rivers, who was fighting back tears. Rivers, you deserve to be judged by your character, your achievements, and your potential, not by the color of your skin or the assumptions people make about where you come from. This court orders the University of Michigan Law School to admit you immediately and to pay damages for the discrimination you suffered. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Caleb Rivers collapsed into his chair, overwhelmed by the moment. His mother, who'd been sitting in the front row, openly wept. As the courtroom emptied, Zephyr remained at the bench, watching the last of the spectators file out. The weight of the morning's events settled on his shoulders like a heavy robe. He'd dispensed justice, but the personal cost had been higher than he'd anticipated. Maya Patel approached the bench with her client. Your Honor, I want to thank you for your courage today. What you did here, it's going to change things. Caleb Rivers looked up at the judge, who'd just changed his life. Your Honor, I don't know what to say. What happened to you this morning? What you did for me today? I'll never forget it. Don't thank me yet, Zephyr replied. The real work starts now. When you get to law school, when you become a lawyer, when you're faced with your own moments of prejudice and assumption, that's when you'll truly honor what happened here today. After they left, Zephyr sat alone in the courtroom, surrounded by the portraits of judges who'd come before him. He thought about the security guards who'd challenged him, wondered if they understood the lesson of the morning. He thought about all the young people who'd been in that courtroom, watching justice unfold in real time. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, friends, and family members who'd already heard about the case. The video of the security checkpoint confrontation was going viral on social media, and legal scholars were already calling his ruling a landmark decision. But what struck him most was a text from his mother. Grandma would be so proud. You showed them that dignity can't be taken away, only given up. And you never gave up. The courthouse was quiet now, the day's drama settling into the permanent record of American jurisprudence. Zephyr gathered his papers and headed for the door, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new assumptions to overcome, new opportunities to prove that justice really could be blind. As he walked past the security checkpoint on his way out, McKinley and Torres stood at attention, their faces flushed with embarrassment and respect. They'd learned something today, too, that the person you underestimate might be the very person who holds your fate in their hands. The story of Judge Zephyr Washington reminds us that prejudice often reveals more about the person making assumptions than the person being judged. In a world where we're quick to categorize people based on their appearance, age, or background, we must remember that true character lies beneath the surface. Every day, we encounter people who don't fit our preconceptions. The young person who seems too inexperienced might be a visionary leader. The individual who doesn't look like what we expect might be exactly what we need. The person we're tempted to dismiss might be the one who changes our world. Zephyr Washington's badge didn't make him worthy of respect. His character did. His education, his integrity, his commitment to justice, these were the qualities that mattered. And when we learn to look beyond the surface, when we choose to see potential instead of prejudice, we create a world where everyone has the chance to show their true worth. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own assumptions and biases, then please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that challenge us to be better, and let me know in the comments how this story affected you.